This is idea of this is a study club, and the club will last for 4 weeks. So we're going to meet every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. This is module 1, aesthetic options and material selections. And basically, we will meet every Tuesday. So you should be able to see the dates here on the right side of your screen. So today is April 14th. We'll meet again April 21st, April 28th, and May 5th. And each of those subjects and topics will be a different subject for us.
Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done. That's how most sales is done. And that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do. We say how we're different or how we're better. And we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You ready to buy a computer from me? All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
And that's one of my favorite expressions is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And I would ask us all, and you've probably heard me say on so many occasions, why do we do what we do? What's the point of what we're trying to do? It's a healthcare profession. We're trying to be the best we can to manage the health and needs of our patients and to understand. So during this next 4 weeks, our goal is obviously to meet each week, share some of the information, but I have to be honest and tell you the information only matters if you apply it. I've said over the years a million times that there's a lot of head shakers in audiences, right? And those are the people who they've heard it all before and they know it all, but they never really live or utilize it. And that to me is always challenging. So applying what we learn is the most important. Question everything with why. Don't trust me, don't trust anybody. Question, why? Why is this material better than that material? Why should I use this instead of that? It's always important to me. And the more questions you ask, the better it is. This is the time for you to do it. Don't let it pass. And now's the time to kind of really reflect on the things that we want. So one of the best readings I can suggest for everybody is Start with Why. It's a Simon Sinek book. He talks a lot about the why and the how and the what, and it's been very inspirational to me, my team, and most of the people who have got to utilize it over the years. So I'm going to move through a little quicker because we're really behind schedule with our little hiccup today. I can tell you that Module 1 is going to be basically communication and materials. Module 2 will be lithium to silicates. Module 3 will be zirconia, and Module 4 will be feldspathic materials. Today, I'm going to really kind of go through an overview of how I communicate and what the pros and cons of each materials are. Next week, I'll completely focus on lithium silicate and disilicate materials. I want to make sure you really understand the differential between the two of them. They are two different materials, and they both have strengths and weaknesses, and we'll go through monolithically, micro-layered, and layered with them. On week 3, we're going to go through Zirconium Materials, and I'll talk about translucencies, how I design substructures, or I should say how Jen designs our substructures in the laboratory these days, how we utilize them to support ceramic and micro-layer and layering across the board, and how I manage the color and the aesthetics on them. And then in week 4, we're going to go through feldspathic materials. Feldspathic, just to be clear, are not going to be just feldspathic veneers. Obviously, I could do feldspathic veneers on refractory or layered, and I will show some of that, of refractory or foil, I should say. But I'm also going to show you some other materials that I use that are really amazing, that I can mill I can mill ceramic materials, feldspathic ceramic materials, and I'm really impressed by that. So let's dive into today. And for today, I think the most important part of what we're going to do is talking about the products and process. And realistically, I think we're all bombarded with that, right? We hear constantly about this material is 9 billion megapascal, and how fast I can mill this one, and this one I just have to wax and press, and why is this one better than that one? Well, that to me is product and process. And I think from a point of view of understanding what we need, that doesn't help us. It doesn't give us the why. It kind of gives us the how. And I don't want us to have the how. What I want you to be thinking about is the people that we're coming in contact with, because these people are your family members, your brother, your sisters, your fathers, your mothers, your daughters. And these are the people that actually mean something, not only to us, but to the rest of the family and the rest of the world. And our job is to help them and manage them through their aesthetic challenges and their functional challenges. And to do that, we need to have a really big toolbox. So as you know, most of you, I'm from New York, and thank you all for tuning in and being so patient. We've been hit pretty hard here the last month or so, and the number of deaths that have happened, and the number of sick people and friends that we've lost. And it's a major tragedy I think that we're all living through. And I just hope that we come out of it better and stronger. And I hope our profession really unites and kind of helps push us through. I know for me, I was excited to do this today. I miss being in front of my friends and being able to travel and share. And I'm sure you all miss being out to go out to dinner and out to learn. So today is an opportunity to do that, and to understand how light works is going to be part of our process, to understand which materials interact and how we can utilize them to look real for us. So basically when we start, usually for us, most of our cases start this way, right? We see teeth that we either like or don't like. We see the gingival, we see how the lips surround it. And I'm going to tell you that's useful information, but it's not enough information anymore. Because part of our job is to understand how the person got there. What was their etiology? What do they feel comfortable with? Or what are they uncomfortable with, and can we help them? And as I look through these photographs or these casts that I'd be looking at, I'm actually looking through them in a detective mode. I'm trying to think of, how did this happen? Why is this way? Is this because of a functional issue? Is this just something that's a chemical issue? Where are all the challenges coming from this case? And part of my job as I go through looking at that is to come up with a diagnostic plan. Those diagnostic plans always start in the same way. They start through diagnostic wax-ups and evaluations of what we can and can't do in the process. And as we go through the diagnostics, we're going to utilize that information to manage the preparations of the patient. And I want to be clear that the goal in preparations is really always the same. It's to be conservative, to save tooth structure. But it doesn't mean that we always can. A lot of times we're going to work on restorations that, or teeth that have already been prepared, and we're redoing restorations, or sometimes there's so much decay and caries that we have no choice to go more full coverage. So as much as we'd like to stay minimally invasive, we sometimes have to pick and choose when we can and when we can't. It's not as easy as just saying we don't prep the teeth and we can still restore them. It doesn't really work that way. So we always want to try to find a combination. And once we've had our diagnostics and we go through our prepping, then the key for the laboratory is the impression. You're looking at a beautiful impression from one of the doctors I'm lucky enough to work with. This is Dr. Bernadette Sava. And you can see pretty much every impression she sends looks like this. It's an amazing thing to work on. And it makes life easier for us because we have the ability to make 2 or 3 casts and work our way through the process and double check and analyze. And once we have an impression, we're going to start by provisionalizing our patient. And the provisionals will be just really a testing period for us to evaluate what we like and don't like and the changes that we want to make. Of course, we'll go through the shading and the coloration, and I'll dive into that more in the next modules. But in the end, our goal is to get the patient comfortable, start improving the aesthetics, and then start working through the final case. As you look at that case, I hope you're all thinking, what material? Is this a lithium silicate case or is it a lithium disilicate case? Is it a zirconia case? Is it a metal ceramic case? Is it possibly a feldspathic case? And you should be thinking of all those things. And I know a lot of people in this audience right now are thinking, well, I want the most strength, or I want the most aesthetics, or I want both. And what's the combination and how do I get there? Well, for me, I'm going to tell you that I don't think one material was really the answer for this case. Why? Well, we had different thicknesses of prep reduction. We had different aesthetic values. We had some pontic areas and bridging areas, and that became challenging for us. And we had to manage all of those. And I don't think one material was really the right choice. It wasn't as easy as saying, I'm just going to use this or I'm just going to use that. And as a technician, I spend a lot of my time, just like you, trying to understand how to make things look real. And what does real mean? Well, it means creating the right surface typography. It means managing the coloration between the gingival and the middle third and the incisal, managing the embrasure spaces and all the details that make things look real. But I also have to be honest and tell you that as real as we think they sometimes look, in our hands, they always seem to look great. On the cast, they really look great. What really matters for us is when we actually can put these intraoral and evaluate them with the gingival harmony and the lips and how the papillas fill in. And that's what really is the testing period, right? When we can all kind of put that all together and understand that it actually are concepts from the very beginning of our diagnostic phase up until the provisionalization to the final restorative, all works together. But I gotta be honest and tell you, looking at it in the mouth is one thing. For me, there's a bigger picture, and the bigger picture is a face. This patient is actually a technician friend of mine who's now retired, a wonderful, wonderful lady who I love very much. She's a great lady. And she didn't want me to show her pictures in the beginning, but she's given me permission to now, so I appreciate that. But she was a technician who wanted to change her look, and she asked me to do that for her. And I have to be honest and tell you, I said, why? You should do that yourself. You're a great ceramist. But she didn't want to, so she dove into our world of myself and Dr. Bernadette, and we started working her process through. And in the end, I think she was very happy with what we did. But my question to you, and I know you can't all raise your hand and answer it, my question is a simple one. What material did I use? Which one was the right material for this case? And I'm going to tell you, I used them all. I used metal ceramics, yes. PFMs, old school, metal ceramics with ceramic margins. I used zirconia ceramics, where I made zirconia copings and layered ceramics. I used some micro-layered zirconias, where I only put zirconia with ceramic on the facial. 1 or 2 of them are monolithic. The occlusal surface has no real ceramic on it. And then a bunch of them are feldspathic veneers. And I've used them all together for a reason. My job isn't just to pick a material that makes my life easy. My job is to pick the right material for this human. And I have to make sure that I understand what I can do and why I can do it. And if it's going to last her the long term, have the long term effects that I want her to have. When I was done with the case, I did take one photograph under Polarize. For those of you who are not familiar with Polarize, basically Polarize filters the camera system. So what that allows you to do is kind of see a little bit more in-depth detail in the photograph. That would be the picture on the right of your screen. And the reason I'm showing that to you is because when I look at her case under Polarize, I hope you don't know which is which. I hope you don't know which ones are the veneers and which ones are the metal ceramic crowns and which ones are zirconias and which ones are bridges and which ones are not. That's kind of the plan, right? It's kind of the goal for us as technicians is to be able to manage all that. Now, normally I'd like to spend a lot of time with shade communication and photography. I didn't put that into this series because we made it a 4-week series, but with our little 10-minute mishap today and the need for it. If you are interested in a week 5 bonus, I will gladly organize that, and we could do that at 1 or 2 sessions, and you can invite your dentist friends and your technician friends, and we'll have an extra week where I'll gladly spend it just on photography and communication and all the details. And I'll talk about aesthetic photographs and surgical photographs, and I'll break down the entire shade taking process of how I actually do that, and the importance of what to use and where to use it, and the photographs that are needed. But for today, my focus is really on the materials and the aesthetic options that we have for the materials. So I'm going to tell you that for me, every material becomes critical. And when we look at a case as a technician, I think we tend to go to the simplest scenario. So if I would ask you all to look at this case where the patient obviously needs a new number 9, they have a poor crown. I think my friend Bobby made that crown, so let's not make any fun of Bobby, but it was his first one he ever did, and he's getting better at them today. But you can see it's kind of an ugly looking crown. I know you're embarrassed of it, Bobby, don't worry, you're gonna fix it up. Obviously, everybody knows Bobby, my friend, is a fabulous ceramist, as is Victor and a lot of the people out there today. But how do you manage that? How do you look at that restoration and say, okay, we just have to make a new crown. Let's make it 900 megapascal, and we're good to go as long as it kind of matches. Well, it's not really that simple, is it? Because that tooth is in someone's face, and that face is a brother or a friend or a father or whoever it may be. And his face looks that way, not because there's something wrong with him, because he feels uncomfortable. He's not happy with his smile. He's miserable with that crown that Bobby made, and he wants to be able to change that crown. So he has to be able to go back and look at it and say, we have to put this in a bigger picture. I have to be able to look at the face. I have to also break it down to a dental facial, how it feels around the teeth and in that black hole that my friend Alex talks about so much. And then I have to look at it as a close-up. And the close-up is really more about the color and the shape and the form. But I have to think of it all in one big picture. I can't just say, I'm just going to make a new crown here and we're going to be okay. Also, what kind of a crown do I make? I mean, I know that tooth is prepared already. I understand that I have a lot of space to work with. And I also want to restore some of the other teeth for many other reasons, some functional concerns that we addressed and some aesthetic concerns that we addressed. And for those of you who didn't catch it, the number 10 is really a number 11. So that's really a 2-3 that was moved into the lateral position. And now I have a cuspid to deal with. And that makes life even more challenging because aesthetically, the root is much thicker, the gingival emergence is going to be different, and it opens up a whole new can of doors and windows for me to figure out what to do. So I'm going to take a look at that case. We're going to have that pan in our laboratory. And in our laboratory, for those of you who have been there or have seen me teach before, you know that one of the things that I'm pretty adamant about these days is I want the patient's picture with the case all the time. Why? That's the human element. I want to know what the patient looks like. I want to know what they smile like, and I want to understand what their occlusal plane is so I can manage my way through the case right from the beginning and not just at the end. And remember when Simon Sinek was speaking in the beginning, he said most people start from the how. And this is where I don't want you to start. How strong, how fast, how cheap. Those are not the things I want. What I'm really looking for is, are you viable and why? Why are you viable? What are you doing to make what you do in your business is viable? And for me, that's about the why. That's about asking about what you can do and how you can do it. So the material options for me have nothing to do with how many millions of megapascals they are. I would also argue and tell you that the concept of using MPa, which is standard in the dental industry these days, comes from concrete. First terms, megapascal was measured for using the crushing strength or the breaking strength of concrete and other building materials. So for me, it's kind of a no-brainer that that's not necessarily what we're looking for. Why? Because everything breaks. The harder it is, the easier it can break. What really makes strength, and I'm sure many of you have heard me say it a billion times, is it's a combination of rigidity and flexibility. You can't have one without the other. So just making something hard, and let me be clear, an MPa test measures a breaking point of a material. It doesn't measure the flexual ability of the material. So there are two different modules to think through. So for me, most of us already understand that certain materials like lithium silicates and D-silicates are usually around 400 or 500 megapascal, 300, 350. Our zirconias are anywhere from 6 to 12 today, and those numbers sound fabulous. But in truth, they only teach you a breaking point of materials. Because if you measured a tooth in the same form, you'd find out that a natural tooth is about 130 megapascal. The difference is it flexes as it breaks, where the other materials just break in half. It's a whole different process in the breaking process. So during this aesthetic evaluation, we're going to figure out what materials we need to use, and I'm going to figure out how to fill space, because that's my job as a ceramist, right? How do I manage the space that's there? And that's a lot of space. And by the way, I throw my ceramist friends under the bus when I hear the same gripes over and over again, and that's, oh, the doctors don't give us enough space. Yeah, that's possibly true on some of the occasions, but also your job is to know how to fill the space. And let's be realistic. The average restoration should be about 1.2 to 1.5. That's what ceramics are made to work in. And we will break that down in much more clarity in Module 4. But also, more space is not better. If I have 2 millimeters of space to deal with, ceramics have not been built to manage the opacity and translucency in that thickness of space. They're built to work in 1.2 to 1.5. So more space is not better. Managing the space is your job. And as we look at our patients with their final restorations, I know what happens. Most everybody's eyes kind of go to the restorations and the crowns, where I don't look at that. I'm looking at this, because I have to be honest with you, at this point in our lives, if we can't make some nice embrasure space and mamelons, then maybe we're doing something wrong. And if you're struggling with that, well, we can help you with that. I know myself and Bobby and Victor, and we have a whole great group of people who are out there sharing and teaching. We could show you that easily. The harder part is managing the whole case, managing the patient, understanding what they need and what they don't need. So for me, it starts with the face and it ends with the restorative choices that we make in our restorative world today. And that becomes more and more challenging for us as we go on. So I wanted to utilize this first webinar to kind of break through the materials a little bit. First, let me start by saying the separation of how we look at things today, I think, is kind of silly. As a dental technician, my job is to know everything, is to know as much as I can, not only clinically, but laboratory-wise. And yes, in my laboratory, we do detachables and removable prosthetics. And you'll notice that in the webinar series that I built next week, we have a nice branded version of different people on Friday for Aegis that I'll promote later on for you guys. But I wanted to kind of break through the pros and cons, because obviously I can't dive into every material in 4 short hours, but I just wanted to go through the basics. So when I'm looking at detachable materials or removable, let's say, here's the benefits to them. One, they're probably the most cost-effective process, right? You're paying the least amount for the restorative. They kind of repairable. They have the ability to rebuild lots of structures, right? I can use them to rebuild bone. I could use them to cover up more of the pink. I can fill bigger spaces with them. I can have implants or not have implants. I could use them in combination with natural teeth or with crown and bridge work. So wow, a lot of variabilities there that are a lot of greater them. And today in digital, I could print them, I can mill them. There's so many great things that I could do. But here's the one knock that I'll give it. And the knock is, for me, anytime I'm using any acrylics, they're long-term provisionals for me. They are not final restorations. These are materials that you'll have to manage every 3 to 6 years, and that's a given because of the nature of the materials. Now, millable and printable is changing that a little bit, and you're going to find that the millable materials, the printable materials, have a little bit more of a shelf life to them, but that doesn't mean they're ideal either. Why? Because it's not just the material that changes, it's the biology, right? The bony architecture, the tissue, the facial feature. So all of these things that are changing makes this nothing more than long-term provisional for me, although they're fabulous options and we use them quite often. Lithium disilicate that we're going to dive into, and silicates that we'll dive into in session 2. I think the aesthetics on these are better in general if they're layered. To be clear, the nature of disilicate tends to be a lower value restoration. That is the nature based on the structural components and the makeup of the material. Silicates have a little bit better optics to them, but they still tend to go a little bit more towards the lower value side, and we'll dive into that more next week. Part of the challenges with them is your understanding. Which ones do I use? There's 9,000 colors. Which ingot do I pick? Which block do I pick? What is the prep shade behind it? And all this kind of plays a real role. And I know most of us pick them because we think they're easy, because they have a high megapascal strength. That's not why I'm choosing them. I'm choosing them because, one, they're adhesive or cohesive. They're bondable, which is fabulous, or they're cementable if I need to. And I could use them in different environments, not only inlay onlay, but veneer, monolithic crowns. I could layer them, and I could even use them in the abutment world. So there's a lot of great things there. They are etchable and they are adhesive, which cohesive and adhesive, which I really like. When we talk about zirconia, again, pros and cons. I still think the aesthetics are better if they're layered, but let's be honest. Zirconia monolithically has gotten a lot better, as has lithium silicates and D-silicates. They're way better today than they ever were before. Are they still as pretty as a monolithic crown, as a layered crown? I would argue no. Now, that is dependent on the quality of the ceramist layering the crown. So yes, if you're using two powders and baking it once and grinding it into shape, I could probably get a monolithic to look better. But if you're building it proper and managing the light transmission and the optical capabilities of opacity and translucency, no, they do not look better. They might look the same in your hand, but optically, intraorally, they don't. As I said before, I don't care about the megapascal strength. I can use them for bridges, longer spans, which I do like, but they are limited. Why? Embrasure spaces. How much connector do I have? How much pillar do I have? What is the level of bone? And despite all the studies that you're seeing, I'm going to argue and say they're not truly bondable yet. We are seeing many studies that talk about the bonding ability of zirconia. And to do that, you're going to etch the zirconia for 20, 30 minutes. That might sound good, but realistically, all you're doing is increasing more fracture resistance. You're going to actually make it where they break easier, because not only are they very rigid, but now they have pitting on the internal aspect of them. So for me, I'm not so interested in the bondability of them at this moment. And for all the doctors that I know that work with it, I always push to them to use something like a Z prime. The Z prime makes the cement adhere better to the zirconia, obviously because you can't really bond it very well yet. What interests me most today are a lot of these hybrid materials. I think this is where we're getting closer and closer to nature, and I think you'll see more of this in the next few years. Materials like petcons or even old school composites and different types of PMMAs and nano hybrid materials. Why do I like these materials? Well, their strength is related more to nature. So they wear and move and bend and flex similar to the way nature does. Some of them are micro filled or can be fully layered on top of, which is kind of nice. There's a huge selection, so that's kind of getting bigger and bigger as we go on. They are cohesive, which means a lot of them can be bonded not only to each other, but to other materials and intraorally, which is fabulous. And today they're millable. So as a chairside restoration for our Seraki friends and people who are doing more chairside dentistry, I think it's a fabulous alternative, especially in the posterior. So for me, one of the materials I like for that is Emac. Emac for me is something that I've switched a lot to, especially for screw retained posterior implants. And let me explain the reason quickly of why I push that material. There are other brands, by the way. I don't want to make it sound like this is the only one you can use. This is the one I use, I like the best. Here's why. When we put an implant into the bone, you've lost the periodontal ligament, which was technically the shock absorber, right? And that allowed the tooth to move and fold around and protect itself. Well, once you've placed an implant, you've lost that ability. Now we have a very rigid material in rigid bone, and we're telling you as clinicians and technicians to put a 12 billion 100 megapascal zirconia coping on top of it. Does that really make sense to you? Hard over hard. For me, that doesn't make any sense. We've switched a lot of our screw retains to Emac materials or nano hybrid materials. Why? I'm trying to bring the shock absorber back. because the tooth no longer is a shock absorber. The root is now a metal braced in bone implant. And I wanted to wear similar to nature. To do that, I need materials that wear similar to nature, like enamic hybrids. And you can see that they can be aesthetic. So people say, well, they're not the most aesthetic. Well, they're just as aesthetic or more than monolithic zirconium materials by far. Matter of fact, this is one of the first ones we did. Jen designed it, gave it to Helen. Helen colorized it and stained it. It was a very simple process, and we put it into the mouth next to that ugly crown that Victor did. And you can notice that these actual restorations look really nice intraorally, especially compared to a bad looking PFM there on the side. And I'm liking these for lots of different options today. We actually just finished up a full mouth rehab on a young girl with ameliogenesis imperfecta, which is obviously a crazy disease and has lots of versions of it. But this poor young girl, she's 15 years old. She's walking around with this disease. The teeth are getting eaten away. The enamel is kind of just decaying and rotting away. And she needs lots of treatment. But what do? Do you just start pulling teeth out and putting implants in on a 15? No. We needed a bridge. And the bridge for us became an enamic material. So impressions were taken of her teeth just the way they are. And basically all we did was copy that, scan it, mill it, and design enamic restorations that then Helen colorized and stained and put in the patient's mouth. And it's really amazing that you can see this is the same girl a few months later. She's still 15, 16 years old, but you can see what a difference it made her feel and how comfortable. Look at the eyes and how much she feels better at what she did. And will these last forever? I don't know if they need to last forever. They need to last us long enough that when she gets to 20 and 21, we could actually start figuring out what her final restorative may be. And this may be her final restorative. We can actually go back and remill, and we already have all the information we need. So maybe she's long-term an enamic case. That might be fine for her throughout her life, and let her wear natural. Also, the one thing I didn't touch on was metal ceramics. And yes, metal ceramics are still popular. They're still out there. They're still very useful materials. And for my lab, we do a lot of implant work. So the metal ceramics are really important to us. I'll tell you that I think layered, they still look the best. Again, if you understand how to layer, and we will dive into that more over the next few sessions. They have a higher MPA, but also a much higher flexibility rate. So yes, the technical MPA is about 600, but if you watch that on a testing process, it bends all the way down before it breaks till it gets to the 600 point. It's good for bridges, especially long span, because I can keep the connections really low. I still think it's one of the higher aesthetic materials out there based on your knowledge of how to use it, and that's really the key. And in the end, I could use it for so many things. So what's my goal here? My goal here is to really walk through and let you understand how the light works. Basically, our goal to make restorations look proper is to make sure that the light interaction with the restoration works. And this is why your single centrals usually don't look as good as they should. It's not just about the color, but it's about the optic ability of the central to absorb the light and push it up into the gingival tissue. That's what nature is doing all the time. That's what our restorations need to do. So when we look at nature, so a few natural teeth that I pulled out, I had nothing to do last week, so I just pulled these out, and we can kind of look at them and understand that optically wise, look at how well the light kind of highlights into what they do. And I could break these down for you and show you, and in each session I will, I'm going to show you different materials on the restorations. I put a little glimpse of that in here today just to kind of get a feel, but if I take a natural tooth and I cover it with a substructure, and I want to be clear that substructure can be zirconia, lithium disilicate, metal ceramic, it could be any of them. What you tend to get is this shadowing nature around the or underneath the substructure. Whereas if I take away part of the substructure, it actually allows light to go into the tooth, and that will give you some light up into the gingival tissue. Also, teeth fluoresce. So while we need our ceramic materials to have a higher fluorescence to them and not just be able to have brightness or opacity, we need to have a little of everything. So for me, what am I looking for? I'm trying to get light into the root of the tooth and to manage the pink part as much as I'm managing through the white part. And I'll break this down for you over the next few weeks with different materials. I'll show you some Mark II materials, and I'll show you some Suprenity, and I'll go through some ambria, and I'll go through every material that I could think of, different types of zirconias, and I'm going to kind of break each one down for you each week as we go through. So let's run through a case quick, because I know we're getting close to our time. We're going to run a few minutes over here, but if you look at our patient, this is Lara, and you'll notice that Lara is pretty unhappy right away. You can see it in her eyes. And I'm going to move to this really quickly, only for time. But
Peter?
yes.
Peter, real quick, on the case, you mentioned using different materials for different purposes.
Yes.
Do you take into consideration untreated occlusal disease into using a stronger material? Being if the patient is choosing not to address occlusal dysfunction, are you utilizing a stronger material?
So to answer the question,
from Ryan,
it is not necessarily. Harder materials. So let's kind of create a scenario. So the patient has a lot of wear, functional issues, maybe a secondary chemical component right now, and they're wearing through nature, right? They're wearing through their teeth. Us putting a harder material and a more rigid material on one side of the arch is only going to cause more wear on the opposing side of the arch. So that would be one challenge. If we're doing both arches, two harder materials, well, of course they will protect themselves because they're both harder, but will they protect the biomechanical nature of what's around it? What will the bone look like 5 years from now? What will happen to the tissue? What will happen to the adjacent teeth? So I don't like to look at it as just the harder is what protects us. It's the thought process and the occlusion that kind of protects us. Hopefully we'll come back to that a little bit more as we get towards the end. So I'm going to try to rush through this case. I did have a few more cases in here. I don't know if we'll get to them all, but will we shut off at a certain time, Jim, or we can run a little over without an issue?
It should allow us to run over a little bit. Yes, okay. No problem.
So let me try to run through this case. And there's a lot that went on to this case. So I'm going to kind of skip through all the hard parts. The bottom line is we had to move the cuspid because it was in a bad position. The cuspid on the other side, the number 11, was a deciduous tooth or a baby tooth, so that had to be removed. We actually used a liner to move these teeth and push them around a little bit and create some more space for us to work in. We did a little extension. This is one of my doctors here on Staten Island, Dr. Mike Ricciardi, did this case. He did a composite bonding to get the aesthetic positions back, and an implant was placed in the number 11 position. Now, the next challenge became, how do we restore that? Do I use a 1200 megapascal zirconia? Do I use a lithium disilicate? Do I use metal ceramics? And why? What's the reason for thinking? Well, the thought process for me goes to two things. One, I want the most amount of strength and flexibility because it's a cuspid strong tooth, but I also want an aesthetic parameter. What's the aesthetic parameter? Look at the tissue. It's a thin biotype. It's a bio 1, which means whatever I put there is going to show through. Now, you saw the beginning photos of the patient. It doesn't really matter, right? Because she's kind of more of a brachiofacial patient. Doesn't look like she showed that much. But that's not the way we do it, right? Because we don't work for the how, we work for the why. We work for what we believe in. And I believe that the right thing to use was a metal abutment, but I also wanted to manage the aesthetics. So what did I do? I cut the metal back. I used some ceramic margin material, highly fluorescent. I shaped the tissue the proper way. And again, we can get into this. Maybe this is bonus module number 6, implant design and managing bigger implant cases, which I have no problem doing. We'll gladly do. So in the end, I wound up making a metal ceramic old school PFM crown over an old school metal ceramic abutment, and next to that made feldspathic veneers. In the end, you'll see the difference of those on the cast, and we'll put those in the patient's mouth. And I want you to be clear, if you start from number 6 and you work your way over to number 11, you're talking veneer, 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 metal implant PFM. And in the end, yeah, the incisal edge looks okay, but really what matters here is the pink, right? We've gotten some light up and some optics into the tissue, and that's really where our job is to manage those aesthetics. And by the way, she wasn't a brachiofacial patient. She's actually a VME patient. She showed a lot of pink. Had we not managed that, had we not lived by the why or the belief, we would have had some problems with this case back at the end. So we always want to do it the right way. And whatever the right way is, we have to manage through. So I mentioned metal ceramics, and I think I still do a lot of them. And although the technology is great for us today, I think there's a lot of options that we can look through as what we would want to do. And as we look at our patients, we have to say, well, what do we need here? What are we restoring? How much tooth structure? Is there enough tooth structure left? Can this be minimally invasive? What's the diagnostic process? Are we adding to the teeth? Are we taking away from the teeth? And all that has to go into the process before I could just say, I'm going to use this material. So the picture is bigger for me as it is across the board. Preparations will be done, our provisionals will be placed, and then our shade determinants, just like we would normally do, and going through all the shade selection, capturing it. At the end, I'm going to make a final full upper arch restoration. And I always say that as great as it is to have the materials, we have to know which one is right for the case. And in case you guys haven't figured it out yet, this is actually a metal ceramic case. Why? Well, look at the connector sizes. Could I have had the embrasure spaces and the gingival position there with a zirconia restoration? The answer is no. That doesn't mean I'm anti-zirconia. I love zirconia. It just means my job is to have a deep toolbox and understand which ones to use and why. So for this particular case, that was the better option for this patient. And every case is different. And as we work our way through the cases, we start to understand that better and better, that every case has an option. So metal is still good. Zirconia is great. Lithium disilicate are great. They're all great materials. I'll leave you with one case I'll run through really, really quickly, and then you guys can answer some questions. So I'll basically run through this really quick. The bottom line is our patient had a reverse curve before we started. He was in an accident. He lost his 2 front teeth, and you can see the bone levels on the 7 and 10 are problematic. The good news for us is the reverse curve that he had is what he has always had, and it's kind of what he wanted to live with. So even though we want to lengthen his teeth, that's not necessarily the way that it should be in his face. And we know that because we get to see him in the past. This is what he looked like before the accident. He always had longer cuspids than the centrals. So we'll go through our diagnostic wax-up phase. The implants will get placed. We can dive into this more in an implant module if we choose to do one. The provisionals are done and managed through aesthetics and managing the emergence profile of the provisionalization. And then we're going to start working through the rest of the process. We're going to wind up doing a full crown on the number 7 and a veneer on the number 10. After the impression is taken, the shades are communicated. Again, we can address that in an extra module with shade taking. And then the pink communication, because we do a lot of pink ceramic. And again, we can add that into the implant module. You'll see I made 2 metal abutments, and those abutments have a little hole sticking through the facial of one. Also, the number 7 is full coverage, and the veneer is going to be, the number 10 is a veneer. The abutments are made, and I'm going to start my build-up process. So you can see that I'm going to start it simply. I'm using VM13 for this, and I'm going to start with my effect chromas and powders and start really developing the base core of what I'm doing. I'll bridge that into my dentin materials, and I'll start creating what I call my ceramic frame. And then I'll bring that in with my translucent dentins and some enamels into eventually my mamelon materials, which are the most important parts of most of the buildups for me and help us really manage and manipulate the light across the board. Then I'll cover that with my enamels. And sometimes I'll even use a little transpadentins for that. I'll start adding through my pinks and do my first and second bakes. And in the end, we'll finalize those restorations and send them back to the doctor. The doctor will receive that with an implant verification jig that you see there on your left. Also cement spacers that you see in the middle and on the right. That's because these do not really need to be cemented. They're just putting cement in very thinly to provide a little bit of a sealant for moisture. The retention is actually through this hole that you see here on the lingual, and that will be a lingual set screw. And you see the angle of how that comes through. So the abutments are torqued down. The implant bridge will be set in place and screwed in, and we'll finalize the restoration as a 4-unit restoration, and we'll manage the white, the pink, the face, and all that applies for our patient. And in the end, sorry, I went through this one a little bit quick. We lost 15 minutes or so in the beginning, so I'm really trying to go through it a little quickly. We have 3 more weeks together, and like I said, I have no problem adding a 5 and 6 for you guys for any of the topics that you want. I would think color communication and photography would be great, and obviously maybe something with implants and doing white and pink restorative at the end. And I'll let the patient speak for himself.
Great. I'm super happy. Tell me about, you know what, the experience of having teeth again.
Oh my God, it's awesome. I'm sure as you noticed when I first walked in here, my front lip was kind of covering my teeth a little bit more than they are now. You just walk around with more confidence.
So in the end, I will see you all next week for module 2. That'll be lithium silicate and disilicate materials. But hopefully, Jim, if you have some questions, we could open up to a few questions, and I'll say thank you guys. Sorry for the little hiccup. I know we had a little problem there in the beginning, but I think we hopefully fixed it, and we'll be a little smoother for next week's session. So thank you all for participating. I want you to know there's like 300 people that signed in, so it really means a lot to me. Thank you. And hopefully, Jim, you have some questions that I can answer for everybody.
Yeah, so Peter, we have one from David. Is Emac strong enough for screw retained restorations?
So, David, I'm going to throw you under the bus and say that I don't think you got the point that I was making. It's not about the strength. So yes, could you use lithium disilicate, by the way? And that's why next week when I break down the different materials, I want you to understand Emac is a brand. It is not a material, right? And one of the mistakes we make in our profession is we let the companies dictate the name of the product rather than what the product is. So there are several companies that make lithium disilicate materials and lithium silicate materials. I use obviously ones from other companies, but the point I'm making to you is, of course, it's strong enough. That doesn't mean that it's the right material for a particular case. That's going to be based on a per case basis, not just this one's 8 billion megapascal.
All right, thank you. We have another one from Stephen. Did you have to use titanium porcelain on the implant abutment at the margin, so of that implant case?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I didn't actually. I think Stephen, his name was Stephen. I didn't. What I actually,
yeah, Steve Hornbeck.
We used the UCLA and we casted the UCLA with a ceramic gold metal. And then I was able to kind of just hollow that out and apply the margin material straight to the abutment, which I love, by the way. We do that quite often. Now, look, if you're milling titanium abutments and you want to use a titanium ceramic to do that, I'm okay with that. But I'll give you another option. You can actually bond composites to it. And the composites bond very well to titanium. And if they're going to be subgingival, then I'm not worried about the colorization and the wearing of the composite because it's mostly encased with tissue around it.
All right. And then we have one from Nassar. He's asking about which one you think has better marginal integrity, a platinum foil technique or any other, refractory or mill.
Yeah, so thanks, Nassar. I think I know who you are. How are you? I would say that a lot of that is in the hands of the operator, right? So in module 4, we're going to go through veneers and refractory and foil and milling. And I'm going to be honest and tell you that they're probably all just about as good, depending on the ability of the person doing it. If you're a fabulous designer, you're going to get incredible fits in feldspathic materials. If you're a good ceramist or you have a good dye system, like using an alveolar cast like I do, you'll get great margin of integrity. And the same with foil. I happen to really stink at foil, to be honest with you, but I know people who are fabulous with it and do an amazing job with it and get great marginal integrity.
All right, Frederick is asking on the last case, 7 and 10, any consideration about extracting those two teeth, number 7 and number 10?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny, Dr. Savan Finkel did that case. I think I had his name on the screen. And he actually just showed that case to NYU last week, and that was the exact same question that all the doctors asked. Two things to think of. One, we received the case with the implants placed already, so that wasn't an option for us. Had we received it without the implants placed, would we have considered extracting the 2 teeth and putting 2 implants in the laterals and making a 4-unit bridge? For the management of the pink, that would have been the best scenario by far. But you do have to take into the account that there was nothing really wrong with the number 7. We only put a veneer on it for aesthetics. And are you willing to remove a healthy tooth? And actually, I'm sorry, the 10 was really healthy. The 7 was slightly compromised, but not sure if it was my mouth if I would have wanted to remove it. So I think this is where our toolbox as technicians and dentists really has to be deep, right? This is where we really have to be able to think through the case and try to figure out what's the appropriate scenario for the long-term functional and aesthetic success of the patient.
So this is from Kim. It's a multi-question. Can you explain more about the implant case, how you made it with a PFM, what metal, layered porcelain, under the tissue or not, milled?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the last case, it was 100% metal ceramic. I used nothing but 52% gold, which has been standard for us forever, and it's got a high palladium, which means it's a fortune right now. But that's predominantly what we use across the board. It is all layered. On the PFM on number 7, there was a ceramic margin. 99% of my PFMs, I use ceramic margin. And by the way, as a lead-in for module 3, you guys are going to be kind of surprised when I tell you that most of my zirconia copings are ceramic margin today too. I'm not using zirconia to the margin, and I'll go through that in module 3. But in the end, it was metal ceramics. Our opaque system is intricate, and Abe does an amazing job on my team that manages that, and Helen too sometimes. And then it was layered. You know, it was layered with anywhere from, I don't know, 8 to 30 powders, depending on what I was looking to do, and the pink was also layered, and most of the pink is done in the second bake for me, and I would gladly dive into that more in another module. If you'd like to have that, please just request it to me or to some of the VITA people, and I will put it together for you.
So there's definite interest in both the photography and the implant module, so we'll look at those. Another question by Kim is, what kind of, or what material did you use for the Emac for the stains? What light cured material?
Oh, so that's a good question. So
Emac.
Truth of it is, I wasn't in love with some of the VITA stains back then, so I didn't use those stains. I think I might have used some of the GC stains. I think since then, VITA has worked on some newer stains. I know I've tested a few that are going to be much nicer, so they'll be a little bit more useful for us. But I did use the VITA glaze. That glaze to me is by far the best glaze on the market. So you could pop in and out with different stains. I don't think that's critical, although today I'm more in our camp, but I think back then when we started doing them, I was using some different stain kits.
All right, and Bill's asking, what kind of metal are you using for your PFMs? What alloy?
52% gold, palladium, and I think we're buying it all from Argent now. We're definitely buying it all from Argent now. We've shifted all our business there in the last few years for many reasons. I like them, nice people, and they have some good metals. I don't remember the name of the specific metal, but it's a 52% gold, and if you email me, I'll send you the page on it. We do have another metal that we'll use sometimes. It's a little higher silver content that works, you know, for single units. It's a little cheaper, honestly, but we're pretty comfortable with the 52%.
All right, and then on the implant case, the 4-unit implant case, the retained bridge 7 through 10, how did you maintain the height of contour, which may be the cervical height of contour as well as the length?
I'm assuming you mean the gingival emergence. If I'm wrong, you can retype the question, but I'm assuming you mean the gingival emergence. And the goal of what we did from the provisionalization, which I'm sorry, I kind of ran right through, but we managed the emergence profile in the provisionalization. That was done over about a 6-8 week period by mostly the doctor. So he would add a little bit or take away a little bit and create a nice flat, even emergence. And then at the end, he just transferred that information to me to put the ceramic in the same spot. The goal of it was not only to have it blend in, but was to make it cleansable and hygiene manageable.
So Kirsten is asking, are you using the Galvano technique? And if so, when? It's an old system.
I'm not using the Galvano technique. It's a great technique. I used it years ago. I'll put a little plug in for next week, not next week, actually this Friday coming up. We have something that I've organized it, a few friends of mine, and we're kind of doing a give back for the whole profession. So please, I'd love you guys to join in there. And the reason I'm plugging it now is because Arian Deutsch will be there, and Arian is probably by far the best, I think, in the country with the Galvano technique, and he uses it in different ways. He's using it for internal aspects and denture, but he's going to incorporate that in his presentation on Friday next week. We are not. I may go back to it at some point in life. We used to do them years ago, but lately, my team with Keon and my team, wow, we cast pretty amazing, I have to be honest. And we're pretty specific. And if you saw some of the designs and implant cases and castings that we're doing, I'm pretty content the level that it is, and you're not going to get a much better fit or contour by only with Galvano, although Galvano is a fabulous process aesthetically.
So Dr. Goodman is asking, when is the best time to decide on what material you're going to use on a specific case? And does the material change after you see the case? In other words, sometimes do you change once you look at the case yourself in person?
Yeah, just so you know, I text that question to Dr. Goodman to make him ask it so he would look better, just so you guys know that. Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So I would tell you that, in truth, we had this conversation with a lot of the NYU doctors the other day. What you don't want to do is pick your material too early, right? Because too early means the material drives the preparation. So let me give you an example. You decide you'd like to have a very minimally invasive case, and because of that, on the bicuspid, you're going to do Vonlays. You're going to kind of cover the facial and the occlusal. Well, that means that now you've limited yourself to lithium silicate or disilicate materials. No problem, they're good materials. But what did you save? You saved 1 millimeter of lingual enamel on a bicuspid. Are you really a minimally invasive dentist, right? And the answer is no. So the restorative is first based in the diagnostic process. What is our diagnostic process? Meaning that are we looking for full coverage because of caries, wear, chemical components, or functional capabilities? And what is the aesthetic need? Is the patient looking going from an A6 mouth to a 1M0, an OM0? Well, then we have to manage space. So I'd say that we start to formulate a plan for the restorative in the beginning diagnostics, but you know as well as everybody else, when you're in the mouth and you're prepping a tooth and all of a sudden you realize that that tooth that you were going to be minimally conservative on has caries 360 or has other issues, you're going to have to be able to work on the fly sometimes.
Great. So Angela has a question about zirconia and the margins. In a ceramic margin with zirconia, do you cut it back manually or do you design it as part of the digital design?
It's funny because thanks, Angela. When I used to teach that, I used to teach it from metal ceramics years ago. And the goal of it was we would design the metal ceramic coping so that the margin rested on the actual margin of the die. And the reason we did that, and everybody used to say to us, why don't you just wax it that way and not have it? And the real reason is, how do you ever know if the coping seats 100% if you don't have a sealed margin? So the answer is, we want the coping to be full contour margin, and then I cut it back at the end, be it zirconia, lithium disilicate, or metal ceramic. And I will address that more in module 3.
All right, and on the last case, the implant case, how did you manage the cleansability of the crowns, the restorations?
So if I'm being honest with you, I'm going to say, is it the most ideal cleansable case? It's a difficult one. It won't be ideal, but the situation wasn't ideal. He got punched in the face in a bar, and that's what he was left with, even after a bone graft, right? So we're managing the challenge. But that's the reason we didn't connect the teeth. That's why we left the 7 and 10 single units and the 2 unit splint. This way you could floss thread and still be able to get in and underneath there and clean it and water pick clean also. So we managed it to the best of the ability for the circumstances.
So Christina has a question that you could probably elaborate further in one of the other modules, but in general, it's how do you work with pink porcelain? You know, how do you work with it? How do you do your framework? In other words, what's the step-by-step when you're working with a white-pink scenario?
Yeah, so if that's Christina in Texas, hello, I'm not sure if that's who that is, but
I don't know.
but either way, I think the pink is really challenging, but here's the challenge for us today is I could tell you I'm a very big implant lab, right? We're probably about 60, 70% of our cases have implants in them. And I do probably 25 or 30% of my cases that I use pink ceramics on. So we treat pink ceramics just like any other system, right? One powder is not going to cut it. I might need 6, 7, 8, or 9 of them sometimes to create the depth and the colorations that I use. It's a little hard to go through all the details of that now, but if we do the implant module, then I can kind of dive into the pink part a little bit more. But I will tell you, I treat it very similar to a normal layering system of creating opacity and translucency and high and low value areas.
So Bill's asking, what is your current mindset on digital models, the creation of digital modules?
So thanks, Bill. I think we're using more and more. We're printing some digital models in the lab. Probably about 10% of our work is coming in that way, maybe 15. I know that's probably not the norm in some of the labs that I'm in. I'm seeing that in the 30, 40 percentiles. I see some that aren't doing it at all, right? It really depends on it. Here's what I would tell you. The scanning ability is fabulous. It's getting better and better. The capture of information is really there in the scan. Where we're losing that information is in the printing or milling of the cast. Now, let me be clear with that. Can we mill or print a model that gives us all the detail that's captured in the scan? And the answer is yes. Will you ever mill or print a model with all that detail? And the answer is no, because the printers and milling machines that we're using, they would take days to capture all those little details, and they'd have to be really precise machinery. So our take in my laboratory and how we run it with my team and Jen and Helen and Keon and Abe, we really look at it as the digital model is fabulous for single molars. We've even done some veneer cases on it for larger kind of veneer cases, which I was anti a year ago, and Bobby used to yell at me for that. But we still think it struggles when you're looking at surface topography. And I can tell you, I tested I tested a few veneer cases where I've made both a stone alveolar cast from a PVS impression and a digital cast, and I never found the two of them to kind of meet very well, although I've had great success with the digital veneers fitting well in the mouth. So, you know, it's still a little questionable, but I think where the detail is being lost is in surface topography. So in single centrals and anterior 2s and 4s, I'm a little more, you know, scary about it. But single molar dentistry and other stuff, I think it's fabulous.
All right, so Robert is asking probably the most important question to you, Peter. Do you think the Rangers will ever win the Stanley Cup again?
They did it in 1994, and if you're home like me for the last few weeks, you get to rewatch a lot of that, and the Islanders winning the 4 series in the 80s. So where's Robert from?
It doesn't say, but
it's a good question. Thank you, Robert. Yes, they will, hopefully in the next few years.
All right. What do you think of the more modern color systems like Mayo for monolithic work?
I'll be honest and tell you, I haven't touched it for many reasons. Company that I don't really work with or want to work with, honestly. At this stage of my career, I've been very lucky to be able to choose the companies I want to work with. I guess VITA picked me and I picked them, and it's been a very synergistic relationship. And the answer to that, simply without being too politically, is I try to work with companies that support our profession and that support our technicians to be better and to grow. And if companies aren't willing to do that, and they're just looking at the me too, how fast, how quick, how strong, how much can I sell, without backing it up with the education, then they're not companies for me. So there are some products that I specifically avoid. That is one of them. But in general, I would tell you that there's lots of new staining techniques that are out from many companies, and a lot of them are good. A lot of them are good. I'm still not the biggest stain and glaze fan, to be honest with you. So for me, I'd still rather micro layer or fully layer. And I think, to be honest with you, that's part of what sets our profession apart. I could tell you, as I traveled around the country for the last few years, the labs that seemed to be struggling the most were the ones that were producing the lower end monolithic restorations. And the ones that couldn't keep up with demand are the ones that were the viable, that were layering and thinking outside the box and having different options and alternatives. That's no knock to monolithic. I make monolithic crowns too. I guess I just want to make sure that we understand that our job is to know when and where to use all the materials and have a didactic approach to the needed solutions for each patient.
All right, and just a side note, the Mayo, you know, with the VITA stains, you can also add a glass to it and be pretty much the same. So from Liana, if I'm pronouncing that correct, do you use eLabs?
Hey, hi, Leanna. How are you? Good to see you. Good to hear you. So I don't. So eLab, my friend Sasha actually kind of came up with that. I don't want to throw him under the bus. Sasha's a fabulous, great guy and a really bright guy too, by the way. The concept really started years ago with grade cards, right? So you'll notice probably in some of the photos I showed you where my shade tabs had a little grade card on them. That was the original concept from years ago, was basically being able to calibrate a photo and utilize it. Is the eLab great? Yeah, it's fabulous. It works wonderfully. It works best. Its real purpose is single central dentistry. I'm going to tell you though, even with it, it doesn't mean that you're perfect every time. I think we're getting to the point with the photography, the material selection, and utilizing the polarized and other options. We're probably around the 70, 80 percentile with single centrals today, which is higher than it's ever been. But I still think there's a challenge of what that level means for us. And it might be different for each patient. I could tell you I don't have one single central that I'm proud of. I could show you a billion of them, but I'm not necessarily proud of them. But yes, the system is good. It's a good system. And Sasha's a great guy. It's just, I work without it only because I don't feel the need for it based on I'm using the same principle anyway.
So Angela, on your screw retain cases, are you cementing your restorations to the abutment in the lab, or are you letting the clinician do it?
So thank you, Andrew. If it's a true screw retained, we're cementing it in the lab. And for that, I kind of like the Panavia if I want to mask the metal, or some of the Ivo cements for that. But we're cementing those ourselves. If it's a set screw retained, which is a whole different ballgame like the last case I showed you, then no, of course not. The doctor's just using a little bit of temporary cement.
All right. So I think we're pretty much on the an hour for the actual webinar as we caught up. If Peter, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your webinar series.
Everybody for our hiccup in the beginning. I know that's a nightmare. I was stressing about it. We checked it this morning. Everything seemed to be fine. So I think it was all Jim's fault. I'm pretty sure he was screwing up over there.
I'm sure it is too. So we look forward to all the rest of your weeks, your series of webinars.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more to be said. And some of these questions can be picked up in the next few weeks.
Yes, and you can email me in between, or email Jim or anybody else. We'll be here every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. And also, I hope you all join us on Friday for a completely different forum, but I think that'll be great. So that's hosted by IDT. It's not a VITA show, but if I don't see you there, I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. See you guys in a week. And thank you all for joining. Sorry for the hiccup.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for joining.